Hello there and welcome to this Biology Mind A-Level tutorial on the use of triglycerides. We have two key learning objectives for today. Number one, the role of triglycerides in energy storage, and number two, adaptations of triglycerides as a storage molecule. So a nice straightforward tutorial for you here. So triglycerides are the energy they are a energy storage molecule. I say not the as we know that there are multiple ways in which energy is stored in our bodies, so not only in triglycerides, but for example also in glycogen. But a triglyceride is an energy storage molecule that's used in metabolic reactions. So this is a key function of the triglyceride. Now, triglycerides are very efficient and store twice as much energy as carbohydrates, as you can see in this diagram here. So carbohydrates store this much energy, triglycerides store twice as much. Now, long hydrocarbon chains allow for a lot of chemical energy to be stored in them. And triglycerides are insoluble. So this is because the fatty acids face inwards with the glycerol pointing out. Now this property is really useful for triglyceride storage function because triglycerides do not affect the osmotic potential of cells. So that means that triglycerides don't cause, if they are stored in the cell, they don't cause water movement in and out of the cell, depending on osmotic potential. So this is a really, really valuable property of triglycerides. We've seen it also in other energy sources, such as in starch in plants. Starch is also an insoluble substance, and it means that these substances, these energy storage mechanisms, do not affect the osmotic potential of cells, so don't cause them to swell if water moves in and potentially burst, or to shrink if water moves out. So triglycerides are the main food store in humans. So our body readily consumes carbohydrates and sugars for rapid energy boosts, so that's from glucose, for example, and stores most of our consumed food in the form of fat. Prokaryotes, interestingly, also use triglycerides to store energy, and certain groups of bacteria have been shown to use triglycerides as a reserve compound to store energy. So that was a whistle-stop tour of triglycerides. The take-home message is that triglycerides are really, really important in their energy storage function. Now, this contrasts with, if I put triglycerides up here, so this contrasts with phospholipids, for example. Now, phospholipids are another type of lipid. Remember, both triglycerides and phospholipids are lipids. But triglycerides are important in energy storage, whereas phospholipids have a really important role in the cell membrane. Remember the phospholipid bilayer, which is what we'll be coming on to talk about in our next few tutorials. So I just want to really hammer home the difference between triglycerides and phospholipids. So triglycerides have the following structure. So they have the glycerol. This is our glycerol, bonded to 3 fatty acids via our ester bonds that we met in our last tutorial. Now, phospholipids have a different structure to this. They also have a glycerol. So this is our glycerol here. But they only have 2 fatty acid chains bonded to the glycerol. And in place of the 3rd fatty acid chain that is present in triglycerides is the phosphate head. So note that triglycerides have 3 fatty acids, whereas phospholipids have 2. And another really important property of phospholipids is they are polar. And that's because they have this hydrophilic phosphate head and these hydrophobic fatty acid chains, which makes them polar, whereas triglycerides are non-polar. So this is a nice little summary here of the difference between triglycerides and phospholipids. And I just really wanted to get that in because we've covered triglycerides now. We're about to move on to have a look at phospholipids. They're both examples of lipids, but they have important differences that I just want you to understand. And especially in their structure, in that they're both formed from glycerol and fatty acid monomers, because remember, they're both lipids, but they have a different combination of these, which make them different structures and also give them these different properties of being either non-polar or polar. And in turn, that means that triglycerides are great for energy storage because they've got all of these hydrocarbon tails, and phospholipids are very well adapted for cell membrane structure. Okay, so that's the end of our tutorial there. I will see you for the next tutorial where we'll be having a look at phospholipids now that we've covered triglycerides in sufficient detail. So well done for following through, and I'll see you for the next tutorial.